So, thank you very much, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Tax, Tech and Other Stuff with me, Russell Gammon. I'm here on behalf of Tax Systems. This is episode 3 of our podcast. So, first and foremost, welcome to our first ever external guest. Today, we've got Ian Pay with us, who's the head of data analytics and technology. Thank you very much. At the ICAEW, of course. That's quite an important part of the process. Ian, really pleased to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, head of data analytics and tech at ICAEW, and I've been in that role for just coming up for 2 years now. Prior to that, I was, for my sins, at PwC for 10 and a bit years.
Wow.
I'm not an accountant.
Okay.
I have to apologise profusely for that. But I have worked, when I was at PwC, I was working with external auditors for a number of years on data analytics solutions to support the audit. I also used to be a teacher. I have a quite a varied, unusual CV, it's fair to say. But yeah, joined ICAEW about 2 years ago.
Nice, and it's all going well, I presume, over there. Keeping you busy.
Yeah, it's busy. It's very very busy. And yeah, we know what some of the big topics are. I'm sure we'll be talking about them very shortly. I mean, my role at ICAEW is kind of splits in two, really. I suppose one part is looking after the technology-focused communities that we have.
Mm-hmm.
We've got an Excel community, which is now over 30,000 members,
Wow.
which is really thriving, doing really, really well there. And we also have a data analytics community that's 37,000 members, I believe.
Wow.
And those communities, the analytics community is actually completely free for anyone to join. So you can join that. I'm sure we can share a link to join that if anyone's interested. And we articles, webinars, events, all sorts of things talking about technology in those communities. So a big part of my role is looking after them, and then the other part of my role is the sort of broader membership engagement on all things analytics and tech.
Yeah, nice. And the Excel community, I find fascinating. I'm 15 years into being an accountant, and therefore I am synonymous with Excel, like many accountants are. And I would class myself as a decent user, but then when you get into these kind of communities and the people really, when they know what they're doing, it's a whole other ballgame. I mean, there are world championships in this thing, right? There are actual Excel world championships.
I mean, the Excel world championships are kind of fascinating. We have, I think we've got an ICAEW member who is in the top 10 in the world in Excel.
Wow.
Which is, just goes to show how good you can be as an accountant in spreadsheets.
Yeah, it really does kind of make the everyday Excel user kind of sit back and go, okay, right, there's a whole other several levels above what we get into. And I suppose, what does your, there are the communities, what does your day, the day job is very, very varied, doing lots of different things, I suppose, lots of different content. Obviously, you guys have got a lot of content out there. Is that the main part of it, or is it every day is a different day?
Every day is a different day. It's such a varied role. So I suppose the sort of bread and butter activities is the sort of the content side of things. So that's webinars or written articles focusing on sort of the big topics, whether that's AI or cybersecurity topics, or the sort of blockchain's gone a bit quiet recently, but that's still going to, well, I'd say quietly. I think there's been some big stories in the last couple of days, so that may pop up again soon. So you've got that side of things, but then away from that, it changes so much from day to day. So you've got working on larger thought leadership pieces, research pieces, potentially government consultation responses in the tech space.
Wow.
You've got working closely with our education and training team on new courses or existing courses or different sort of training options. Looking at the data analytics certificate that we run and working on that to develop that further. There's no 2 days are alike. Certainly, nice. It's quite a fun role.
Awesome. No, that does sound really good. Those are the best kind of roles when you're doing lots of different things. So, I mean, I don't know how many minutes we've managed to get into without mentioning generative AI. It is my topic of choice, and as you know, we've spoken about this a few times previously. I've spent a lot of my, I suppose, last 9 months, and I imagine your 2023 was probably the year of generative AI, maybe more than any other technology. It'll be interesting to see if 2024 follows suit, but it was a a bit of an explosion onto the scene, wasn't it? So I guess, does it remain the hot topic? And of course, we all, or certainly lots of the listeners, will have seen that ICAEW put out an awful lot of guidance around generative AI last year. So just tell us a bit about how that's all kind of come to be.
I mean, it's kind of terrifying to think that you're sort of looking at, I think, what was it, end of November 22,
Yeah.
when ChatGPT version 3 kind of went big.
Yeah.
The growth in the number of users far exceeding any kind of piece of technology previously. So the route to 100 million users was faster than Facebook or Twitter.
It was crazy, wasn't it?
Or the internet.
Yeah.
or all of these kinds of things. So it's actually a really interesting journey from an ICAEW perspective, because we were kind of expecting to need to talk about AI a bit in 2023. But I don't think anything had prepared us for quite the volume and the level of interest in the public in AI. And you have to give ChatGPT a lot of credit for this. It's worth saying AI is not new. It's not like it's sort of suddenly became a thing in 2023.
No.
AI has been around for decades, but the public consciousness has changed. This awareness of the potential of what AI can do. And certainly in generative AI, being able to see applications that can actually respond in this sort of human-like way really does kind of capture the imagination in a way that it, when it's just kind of algorithms crunching numbers, probably didn't do in the past.
Yeah.
So from an ICAEW perspective, we've sort of found over 2023, yes, we spent a lot of time talking about AI, a lot more time than we were expecting, but it's been really, really exciting to see how this has all kind of been evolving and changing, and how the conversation's been sort of moving along. And we've been blessed with some really, really good fortune. So we had our annual conference back in November, which we'd planned from the outset to have a bit of a technology and AI theme, but actually ended up coinciding exactly with the UK government's AI summit.
Yeah.
Which was fantastic, because it meant there was a real kind of buzz and sort of interest in AI. And we did manage to get some really good speakers there, including the BBC technology editor, who literally came down from Bletchley Park, spoke at our event, and then went back to Bletchley Park.
That's good bit of kudos.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. And then, as you touched on, the guidance that we put out, we were finding from very, very early on, a lot of our members sort of trying to get to grips with generative AI and asking similar sorts of questions around, at a simple level, can I use it? How can I use, what are the opportunities to use it? What should I be thinking about when I'm sort of rolling this out in my business? All these sorts of questions. So we thought, we've got to put some guidance out in this space to help our members. So we spent a bit of time, and I think we've put together something which is really quite comprehensive.
Definitely.
And actually, for a while, there wasn't really anything else out there like it. We're now starting to see organizations like NCSC issuing guidance around security of generative AI, which is actually also quite a meaty piece of work that they've done. You can use generative AI. It can do some really, really clever things, but you need to be mindful of the sort of legal considerations. You need to be mindful of cybersecurity, but also trying to be positive as well, to say, actually, here are some really good examples of where people are starting to use this technology and how they're doing it in a safe way.
Yeah, and I think the consciousness and the kind of the knowledge and the use has been really impressive over the course of the year. So I remember going out to see customers in, I guess, sort of March, April 2023, and they were just like, oh, we've banned it. We can't, no one can use it. It's against all of our rules. We've got big, strict policies, and if people try to go to the URLs, we've blocked it. And then relatively quickly, within 2 or 3 months, actually, people had realised that, Pandora's box has very much been opened. This thing isn't going away. It's not about switching it all off. It's about using it in the right way. So it's about policies of what, quite clearly, we're not going to allow you to go to public ChatGPT and put in client-sensitive data, but maybe we've spun up our own environment in our own IT stack, and actually it's okay for you to put the data in there now because we know it's not going external. We know it's not training models and doing all that kind of stuff that we don't want it to do. So I think, it's been really impressive that all within a year there's been, from the start of all this, to actually a level of maturity that's really good to see. And actually, the example you gave earlier, and I was giving a talk on this yesterday to one of our accounting firm clients, and you mentioned when the internet first came around. Now, the internet first came around sort of a year later, and I was still at school when the internet first came around. But a year later, it had progressed, but it hadn't progressed anything like we've seen the progression with generative AI. We've managed to cover an awful lot of ground in that first year, or I suppose 13 months or so now. So it's a really pleasing industry to be involved in. And actually, I think also to just see that people haven't gone with that kind of knee-jerk, oh, we just can't use it, it's not going to impact us, and bury your head in the sand. It's been very much, okay, well, what does this mean and how can we embrace it, but embrace the good bits, but also be very wary of the bad bits, if that makes sense.
And embracing it, I think, is really important. There's a kind of business philosophy that's really relevant here, which is to kind of say, if you don't provide your staff with the tools they want to use, then they will find a way to use them, circumventing your controls and your systems.
Yeah.
So I find I always find the notion of sort of banning ChatGPT a little bit of it's almost a red herring, really, because you can ban the URL for ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But if people want to use it, that's not going to stop them finding a way to use it if they're really determined.
Oh, yeah.
So actually, it's much better to kind of allow people to use it, but with the right guardrails in place.
Well, exactly. Everyone's got a mobile phone, everyone can download an app, and everyone can go and either get free access or $20 a month. It's one of those things that I think you're right. And, when you speak to customers, you say you do realise that there are absolutely people in your building using this stuff, whether you want them to or not. It's a simple case of making them use it in the right way. And also, I think there's an education piece there, right? It's about making sure that everybody understands it. I think that your guidance went a long way on that to say, this is how you can use it and should use it, and maybe also shouldn't use it in the certain places. So that's really good. I think a couple of kind of specific areas I wanted to delve into, because it's I spend lots of my days geeking out on this stuff, and I'm sure you do too, but a couple of areas that are specific to tax. So, and this is one of the kind of I guess pieces of logic that I've heard over and over again over the last year or so. So it'd be good to get your take. It's so generative AI is never going to be 100% correct. And the example I always give with that is, if you ask it to complete the sentence, the sky is, well, there are lots of very, very valid and correct answers to the sky is. It can be blue, it can be cloudy, it can be rainy, it can be anything else. So there is no concept of 100% correctness within kind of large language models. But of course, tax is about being 100% correct. You can't submit a tax return to HMRC and say, well, I'm sort of about right. It's about paying the right amount of tax, and it's a thing where 100% accuracy is correct. And therefore, the logical kind of assumption that some people have said is, well, therefore, if the technology can't be 100% right and tax has to be 100% right, then the technology hasn't got a place within tax. I guess what's your take on that? How do you kind of when people, I'm sure you've heard similar kind of thought processes, how do you kind of see that?
Well, I think to answer that question, it's actually very important to just take that step back and say, why are we having this conversation about generative AI and language models? And a lot of it stems from a little bit of a misunderstanding about how they work. And this, because they give human-like responses, we start to think of them like humans. But actually, it's really important to just say, hang on a minute, the way that these things are working, they're all algorithms still. They're all fundamentally just computer programs. But what they're doing is, in a programmatic way, basically predicting what the next word will be in sort of, or the likely next word, or the likely next pixel in an image, or the likely next piece of sound or piece of video. And it's all a probability game, really, the way that these algorithms are built up. So the systems are not inherently clever at all. They're really just determining the likely next step, the next word, the next whatever. And what that means is that it gives the impression of knowing what it's talking about without necessarily having any contextual awareness whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it will, this term of hallucination, it will say things, it will, give, and there's lots of examples sort of that are in the news recently. I think actually an HMRC investigation where someone used previous cases that were generated by an AI tool, and they sounded plausible, but they never happened.
Exactly.
And we've had examples where it will generate entire books and synopses and ISBN numbers for books, but the books don't exist.
No.
But they sound like, and you sort of feel like, if you know so much about this book, why don't you just go ahead and write it? Because it seems to have that knowledge. But when it comes to calculations, it's the same problem applies. Like it doesn't. You ask it to do a calculation like 25 times 57, and it doesn't inherently know that's a calculation. It's all
Yeah.
it's doing is sort of inferring what the probability is of the sequence of numbers that it gives as the answer.
Yeah.
Now it's learning from sources, it's getting better all the time. And the things that it can now start to do is to kind of call on other engines. So if it recognizes something as a calculation,
Mm.
it may actually kind of reach out to essentially the virtual equivalent of a calculator
Yeah.
and say, okay, I'm not just going to programmatically write a series of numbers for an answer because that's what it thinks you want. What it thinks you want is the right answer. So it will go off and get a calculator to get the answer, and then it will return that information for you. So you're starting to see that integration with other tools to kind of do some of that work that generative AI tools themselves are not naturally good at doing.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a couple of things that's interesting, and I'm sure you've seen a few of them. I think I can count 3 that I've seen in the UK and 1 in Ireland where people have effectively taken a language model, and what they've done is they've thrown all of the HMRC manuals and guidance and various public sources at those models, and they've kind of fine-tuned them and trained them. And they're quite good at being able to, if you want a basic kind of query, okay, can you tell me a little bit about entrepreneurs relief, then it's pretty good at going away and finding some right stuff that will do a better job than ChatGPT natively would. But then as soon as you start throwing maths at it, it does quite. I asked it for something where I had profit of $1 million, and it came back and it gave me a tax charge of just over 1.1 million. I thought that was a little bit punitive on the business, and maybe wasn't the correct answer. Although it's been a long time since I've done my exams. But I think you're right. It's about knowing what is and what isn't a strength of a large language model, and I know, you'll probably know better than I, things, like you've got Python plugins that can actually go away and do the mathematical part, because Python is pretty good at maths, whereas large language models are not. Is that probably where you see tax applications going in that space? Is that a fair?
Yeah, you're gonna. It's the power of the generative AI tools is not to do everything themselves. It's actually where they start being able to connect to different applications and different solutions to draw on the expertise of those platforms.
Yeah.
Do the legwork for you. So, you mentioned Python. What it can do is it can essentially write the Python code to do the calculation and then return the calculation result, rather than it trying to do the calculation itself, because it is programmed to be aware of its own limitations in that sense.
Yeah, nice. And I guess in terms of then your role, and obviously, as you said, the year was meant to be a little bit about AI and turned into the year of generative AI or something. How do you do? Have you got good flexibility in your role to be able to say, okay, actually, the thing that really matters to our community is this. It wasn't meant to be this, but it is, and you can just kind of flex. What's your ICAEW hat on? What does that look like in terms of just dealing with the pace of change, and how every day or week seemingly there's a new tool, application, viewpoint, all those sorts of things. I suppose it maybe also keeps it quite interesting.
I mean, I think in technology you have to be just very, very agile.
Yeah.
There's no other way of doing it. So yes, we sort of start the year with our plan in terms of these are the topics that we think we want to talk about. These are the focus areas. There's still bandwidth to cover those, but you just flex things around a little bit to say, okay, well, actually, we need to devote a bit more time to this topic because it's clearly going to be massive.
Yeah.
And likewise, people sort of might think that we have this sort of crystal ball of what's coming from the government, and sometimes we do, but often we don't know what the government's going to do next, and so they might suddenly land a massive consultation that we have to respond to, and we kind of have to do that sort of, okay, drop everything, let's respond to that government consultation because it's a really important thing for us to do.
Yeah, nice. And I suppose, I would dearly love to sit and geek out on generative AI for hours, but outside of Gen AI, just for a minute or two, what else are you seeing? What's 2024? If you did have a crystal ball, what other things are you seeing as being kind of key and important for kind of the membership?
Yeah, I mean, 2024. There's so many different topics. I think my role is sort of very data focused, and I think there's still a really big focus on automation and
Hmm.
the use of data to support um, good decision making. Um, the skills piece is still massive for the sector. There's a really big challenge across accountancy in terms of both accounting skills but also technology skills, and that's something we're acutely aware of and trying to figure out what we can do effectively in that space. And then you've got sustainability,
Mm.
ESG. It's another massive one. It's something that we've been spending a lot of time at the ICAEW talking about for a few years now. We launched a sustainability certificate a little over a year ago. It's doing really well. Obviously, we had COP just before Christmas,
Hmm.
where there was we had a bit of a presence, and Michael Itzer, our outgoing CEO, was attending that as well. So we are sort of seeing ESG being a big topic, and actually in the technology space, increasingly, I sort of see it as a bit of a sort of a Venn diagram where you have the ESG world and the technology world, and
Hmm.
they've started quite separate, but actually the overlap is growing,
Hmm.
both in terms of the role that technology can play in supporting ESG agendas, but also some of the challenges. And again, it's we come back to a generative AI, and it's very well documented that the generative AI platforms are incredibly energy intensive.
Yeah.
And so, from an ESG and sustainability perspective, while all this technology is very exciting, it does pose a lot of challenges
Mm.
um, in the kind of in the environmental space, and we need to be not just mindful of that, but actually thinking about, okay, well, what can we do about it? And a big part of that is actually comes back to being intelligent in terms of when you use it and when you don't use it. There's a
Mm.
great cartoon that I cite a lot, which is essentially kind of two sides of the screen. And on one side, you've got someone saying, I'm going to use generative AI to write this incredibly detailed email from a few bullet points. And then on the other side, you've got someone else saying, I'm going to use generative AI to summarize this incredibly
Hmm.
detailed email into a few bullet points.
Yeah.
And it's basically, you kind of say, well, you didn't need to use generative AI. The first
Yep.
person could have just emailed the bullet points to the second person. So basic level communication still trumps.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm sure you, like others, will. I often use it in my day job to summarize long things. I rarely use it to make me write long things. I think it's actually made me write less, which was probably a good thing. But certainly, yes, the number of times I now, and particularly now you can load in things like PDFs, such and such. Some people put out a 25-page long PDF. Lovely. The first thing I'll do is throw that into AN, other generative AI tool of my choice, and ask for a 500 words bullet point kind of summary. And it's an incredibly efficient way, I find, of at least getting to know if it's going to be something I'm then going to actually get into and read. So there's loads of different use cases, I imagine, like that.
Yeah. And the really good thing actually is with that summary piece, you've got you've got things like ChatGPT, and then we do very firmly advise people not to put client sensitive information into
Yeah.
ChatGPT. But the really great thing is with what Microsoft have been doing, their enterprise solutions. I think it's now called Copilot, but it was Bing Chat Enterprise.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, just a tab on your web browser, as long as you're in an enterprise Microsoft account, then it's all enterprise secured. So you can then start to
Yeah.
put in more sensitive information. It's not you have some comfort that it's not going to go anywhere or kind of get into the wrong hands or be used to train the model and start appearing in random places. So
Yeah.
we're starting to see that sort of enterprise mindset kind of kicking in.
Yeah, and we've had the same. When we started doing stuff on this back maybe 7 or 8 months ago, the first question we ever got from anyone's kind of infosec team was, well, you can't use the public OpenAI stuff. It's not going to work for us. Obviously, Microsoft came along with Microsoft Azure OpenAI services, and that for us has been really important, because now the conversations are like, oh, okay, yeah, it's in a Microsoft stack. It's not going elsewhere. It's really good. Again, it's just a surprise of how well and how mature this stuff has come in such a short space of time. It's been great. I guess just in terms of a final question, any kind of closing top tips you would have that you see? Anything you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I'd say top tips when we're talking about the use of AI. I always say be curious. I think being curious is one of the most valuable things that we can be in the accounting profession. Um, don't be afraid to experiment, to explore. Obviously, do it sensibly. Don't put client data in
Yep.
ChatGPT, as I said before. But just wanting to find out more, wanting to understand more, wanting to try things. I think it's actually it's not just AI, but actually in technology in general. Having a curiosity about how technology works and what it can do for you. Um, and if you're starting to kind of figure out some of those use cases, just start small. Don't
Mm.
try and go for the big prizes. Go for the low hanging fruit. Go for the things that the little things that, save 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, because that will start to get you a sense of what you can do, and then it can grow from that point.
Yeah, and that's it's really good to hear because I think with a lot of our customers in our world when we think about corporation tax comps they're doing 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 a year, and as you say, 5 minutes times 10,000 is an awful lot of minutes. Um, cool. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Ian. Really, really appreciate it. And hopefully listeners have found that really interesting. I certainly have. So thank you very much, and we will speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.